Hi everyone, it's Kris from My Girlfriend's Quilt Shop, and today I'm really excited to be able to walk through with you some of the steps on doing the new mini quilt from Kimberbell. That is the March edition. Very, very cute. Let's take a closer look at what you're going to see in this little mini quilt. First of all, look at that rainbow. Isn't that adorable? I love the colors. I love the background quilting even more. And the fact that you have these little glimmers of sparkle going throughout the sky is pretty dang adorable. So there's the rainbow. Then, of course, we have lucky as the key word for this month's mini quilt. And this is done again with just a basic applique, but I do love the addition of the top stitching that goes around each of the letters. We also have the little shamrock that is done with two different fabrics, and again is a very simple applique to be done. And can you just imagine it on all kinds of projects for the future? I'm thinking tea towels and doing it in a table runner, something like that, making them bigger and smaller. All kinds of fun things can be had with this adorable shamrock. And finally, we ended off with the pot of gold. Now this block has quite a bit going on here, doesn't it? I mean, you can see here that we have the glitter applique sheets. We're also using the gold vinyl. It's just as cute as can be. And I really love the look of the leather for the pot right here that you can see. And the little swirls that go around it kind of almost gives a look of copper, if you will. So, of course, that rainbow ends right there at the pot of gold, but it begins right up at the very top. So let's go ahead and go through all of the different steps to making this adorable mini quilt. And our first video today, we're going to start out with the cutting instructions. So as you can see here, we're about ready to get started with the cutting. And if you've purchased a kit from My Girlfriend's Quilt Shop, well, you have all the fabrics and all of the embellishments ready to go. So let's take a closer look at what's included in the kit. As you can see here, we have a rainbow of colors, right? And the nice thing is this is not only going to take care of the front of our mini quilt, but also the binding and the backing is also included. And then you can see here that we have the different glitter applique sheets along with your leather, your gold, and your brown, and we have mylar sheets here to add that little bit of sparkle. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and set those aside, and what I've also done is printed out my instructions, and they're included in the same 3-ring binder that I've used for all of my months. All right, so as you can see here, we have the Mini Quilts Volume 1, and this is the March mini quilt that we're focused on. And one of the things it suggests, and I think it's a great recommendation, is to cut everything up beforehand, label it, put it in little Ziploc bags, and you're good to go. You're also going to see different embroidery thread colors that they recommend right here. All right, let's turn to page 4 together, shall we? And you're going to see here that this is fabric 1, fabric 2, and so forth, all the way down. You'll also see your binding and back right here. It tells us what is included, in the kit, or if you're doing it on your own, you're going to be able to see what the fabric is needed right there. And I love that it tells us the purpose for this fabric as well. So for example, on this fat 8th, which is the light blue, it tells us that we're going to be using it as part of the rainbow background, part of the rainbow stripe number 6 and pot of gold stripe 6. So it's really nice that it gives us those purposes so that we know what we're doing here. And it also tells us the specific size to cut out to according to what it's being used for, right? Now, not only is this a wonderful reference to look at, but let me take you to the next page, which is page number 5, because you're going to see here some beautiful diagrams that Kimberbell has put together for us that also take us through each of the fabrics and how we cut them, all right, in order to get the most use out of it. So for example, on our back fabric, it tells us to do a 14 by 14 inch square, right? But once we get to fabric 1, which is the blue, and you can see that colored right here, then you can see, oh, we've got several cuts going on here. How exactly do I go about cutting this? Well, let me go ahead and take you through how to do just that. All right, so let's go ahead and begin with fabric number 1. And I'm going to grab my light blue fabric right here. All right, it has some folds in it because it was packaged up, so I'm going to go ahead and take a quick second to press all of that out first. All right, so with fabric number 1, the first thing is to do a 6.5-inch cut across, and then we will turn it around and do a 14.5-inch cut. And then we'll do a 2 by 4 and a 1.5 by 1.5. Now, according to the diagram, you see that it's nice and long, which you certainly can keep it that way. However, I kind of like to have things a little bit smaller, just makes it a little bit more manageable for me with the ruler. So I'm going to go ahead and take the bottom of my fabric and bring it all the way up to the very top. All right. Make sure it's nice and lined up along the left-hand side. And now from here, I will go ahead and cut it. Do you see how this just becomes a little bit more manageable? All right, so the first one is 6.5 inches. So let me go ahead and line this up on a line, on a vertical line on my mat. And I need to go 6.5 inches. So I'm going to be right here. And I cut from my torso out. All right, I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. I still do need this, but I will go ahead and subcut this to be 14.5 inches, as it says in the diagram. So how do I go about doing that? Well, what I'll do is just open this up and turn it the opposite way. My selvage is over here, so I'm just going to go ahead and keep that selvage away, and I will start from the left and go over. And this is going to be up 14.5 inches. So let me line it up on a vertical. And there we go, 14.5 inches, just like that. All right, so fabric 1 is completed for my background of the rainbow. And then I'm going to take this is going to be stash, right? And I'm going to take this other cut from earlier, and this needs to be 2 inches by 4, and then it needs to be 1.5 by 1.5. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my 2-inch strip first. And again, I'm just lining this up 1, 2 on my ruler. All right, so I have my 2-inch strip first. This is set aside, not to be used. And now I'm going to subcut. So for those of you who may be familiar, or not familiar, I should say, to subcutting, I want you just to think of it as this. We went ahead and we cut that first cut that you see here. But if I need to turn it, if I need to look at it this way, I now have a 4-inch cut that needs to be made the opposite way. So because I turned it this way, that means I also have to turn my fabric that way as well. Now I can open this up, and again, I'm just finding a vertical line on my mat, and I'm going to go 4 inches from there. So that's this piece right here. All right, so this is my 2 by 4. I'll set that aside. And now how do I get the 1.5 by 1.5? Well, I'm already at 2 inches. I'll go ahead and cut my 1.5 inch this way, and then I'll just turn it around again and cut the 1.5 the opposite way. All right, this is stash right here. I need to be 1.5, so I will turn it and cut 1.5. There we go. All right, so all 3 pieces of fabric 1 have been completed. All right, now for those of you who are doing the entire thing all at once, one of the things I want to recommend is that with any background fabric, you're going to add what's called a Kimberbell Fusible Backing onto it. All right, very, very important. This is what's going to help reduce puckers and just give a little bit more stability to that fabric. All right, so I have a nice big roll right here. You can see that I've cut into. And so what I usually like to do is just place my piece somewhere on that roll. And I go, oh, okay, there we go. That fits really well. And then I just cut it based off of that. Right? Now, you don't have to do this for all your pieces, just your backgrounds, unless it specifically wants you to. And sometimes it will do that if there's like a dark color that is behind a light color and you want to just be able to not have that show through. That can be very helpful. All right, so you can see that my fusible backing has been cut to the same size as my background. Notice that the shiny side of it is face up, which is up against the background. And the reason for that is because the shiny side is the side that has the glue on it. All right, so with that in place, I'll go ahead back to my ironing station and I will just fuse this in place. Once I fused it on one side, I actually like to turn it over and just do one more quick press on the back, just for added measure. All right, let's go ahead and move on to fabric number 8, which is next in the book. And again, I'm just going to give it a little press real quick just to iron out those wrinkles. So we've got another piece that is nice and long right here. Again, in order to make this a little more manageable, I'm going to fold it in half. So I'll just go ahead and do that right there. All right, the fold is at the bottom, the raw edges are at the top. And just line this up along the left-hand side. All right, so let's take a look at our instructions. The first cut is going to be at 6.5 inches. And it tells us that we want a 6.5 inch cut by 10.5. And then we need a 6 inch cut by 2.5. And then we need one more cut at 1.5. So let's go ahead and do that. The first cut I'm going to make is a 6.5 inch cut. So we'll find a place on our mat. This is my 6.5 inch cut. This I'm going to just set aside, and I need to subcut it at 10.5 inches. So again, if it makes more sense in your mind to turn the book, go ahead and turn the book. You can absolutely do that. All right, and you go, okay, 10.5. Now remember, if I turned my book, I also need to turn my fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it the opposite way. I don't need two pieces, so I'm not going to keep it folded. I'm just going to go ahead and find a marking right here and subcut at 10.5 inches. All right, so this is my 6.5 by 10.5. I'll set that aside. And then it tells me to do a 6 inch by 2.5. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, since my fabric is already in this position, I will keep it at this position, and I'm just going to cut a 2.5 inch rectangle. Again, if you're trying to think, wrap your brain around what I'm doing here, I kept it in this cross position. I kept my book in the cross position. It tells me 2.5 inches, so I'll go ahead and do that first. Okay, 2.5. But remember, it's by 6, and this was 6.5. So no big deal. All I have to do is turn it the opposite way, and I'm just going to remove a 1/2 inch there. So now it will be a 6.5. There we go. Let's see. Right there. Okay. Now, if you were to keep that extra 1/2 inch on, it would not be a big deal either. Okay. All of these pieces have been cut oversized in order for you to have plenty of space to work with. But again, if it's not exact, you're going to be just fine. You've got plenty of fabric here to work with. Now we have one more cut that is a 1.5 by 1.5. And I could do it with this one. I could do it with my, I mean, I've got plenty of fabric to work with, right? But I'll go ahead and do it according to the directions here. And this needs to be a 1.5 by 1.5. So I have it this way first at 1.5. This is stash. I'll turn it the opposite way and do it at 1.5 once more. 1.5. And you can see on my ruler that goes over 1 and then a 1/2 inch. So 1.5 by 1.5. So all of my green stripe has been cut. And what is this? Stash. That's right. If you guessed stash, you are correct. All right. So we've got fabric 8 cut out. Let's go ahead and move on to, let's go ahead and do fabric 4, shall we? This is an 8 by 4 and then a 1.5 by 1.5. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my pink from my little kit here. And let's press out those folds. All right, so I'm going to have this lined up right here along a straight edge right here. And you can see that, let's see, yep, there we go. All right, that looks a little bit straighter. Okay, so we are going to do an 8-inch cut first. So I'm going to come all the way over here to be an 8-inch cut. And then I'm going to turn it so that I can do my subcut at 4 inches. All right, my first cut is complete, 4 by 8. And then the next cut wants me to do a 1.5 by 1.5. So that's going to be pretty simple. Right here, I'll just leave it the way it is. And then cut a 1.5 inch strip. This is stash. And then I turn it around to subcut, also at 1.5 inches. Okay, so 1.5. Perfect. All right, my pink has now been cut. So again, you're just going to continue the same process, you know, doing, pressing out your wrinkles first, right? Press out those folds, and then you'll do your first cut, and then you turn it around and do your second cut as the subcut. And you're going to have plenty of fabric to work with here. And, you know, Kimberbell is always very generous in our fabric requirements, which is nice in case we make a little bit of an oops. You know, that could happen. You never know. And so I'm grateful that we have plenty of fabric to work with. So go ahead, get all of your pieces cut out. You're also going to do the same with your embellishments. All right. Have them labeled if you find that to be helpful. And let's go ahead and begin the fun part, and that is the stitching. So our next video, I'm going to take you through the basics on how to add a background quilting file into your machine. And then how do you add applique on top? It's a very simple process, pretty straightforward, and I invite you to join me for that video next.